And we kick off this evening with a look at the cinema.
I'm not a complicated man. I like cinema.
It's beautiful, beautiful cinema.
Cinema history come to life.
I found my solace in the small cinema I went to every Thursday night.
I'm a professor of cinema.
I go to the cinema for the stories.
There was no competition between the cinema and seminar.
I mean, it's not within the realm of conventional cinema.
And now,
here's Pace and Johnson
with a cinema review.
It is Monday, May 27th, 7 EST, and thank you for joining me for a special episode of the Cinemasters Reviews. Doing this an hour earlier, just got some things going on later today. Hope everyone's having a happy Memorial Day. Hope everyone had a good weekend. Exciting show this week. We were reviewing Furiosa, a Mad Max Saga, the newest entry in the Mad Max franchise, as well as the Garfield movie, the newest big screen adaptation of the famous comic strip character. I say we jump right into our show with our first movie, Furiosa, a Mad Max story directed by the legendary Australian filmmaker George Miller. This is actually the prequel to all the Mad Max film. It's just specifically the prequel to Mad Max Fury Road because it focuses on the character that was introduced in Mad Max Fury Road, that being Furiosa. Of course, in that film was played by Charlize Theron. In this film, we follow her from a young child, as she was played by Alwa Brown, all the way up into her teenage and early 20 years, played by Anya Taylor-Joy. We see her history, how her family was killed by a man by the name of Dr. Dementis, played by Chris Hemsworth, how she eventually took the uneasy alliance with another horrible monster in this world, that being Immortan Joe, and all these people that she met in her journey to eventually exact revenge to take down Dr. Dementis. The Mad Max franchise is one that I've always been a pretty big fan of. I think George Miller, I think what he did back in the 70s and the 80s on such a shoestring budget, like almost feeling like a little Grindhouse-esque, and making these like movies on such the cheap, but also making them look so real and giving them such like a unique feel. Like, I love how George Miller views the apocalypse and views like the Australian desert. I think that's really, really great. The first Mad Max movie I think is good. I think the second one, Road Warrior, is great. I think that's when the franchise really started to establish its formula. Mainly because that first one doesn't really take place in the apocalypse. It's like right before the apocalypse is about to start. Road Warrior is where the franchise takes off. Beyond Thunderdome is one where I think everyone said it before. I really, really like the first half when we're in Bartertown with Tina Turner. Don't really like the second half where we meet the kids. I think it just kind of goes off the rails. But then, yeah, this franchise came back about 9 years at this point, back in 2015 with Mad Max Fury Road. And that is one of my favorite action movies of all time. One of my favorite theatrical experiences was seeing that movie in theaters. I saw it 4 times when it came out. I know some people would say, oh, it's just a 2-hour car chase. I think it's so much more than that. But I think a reason why the movie works is because it is so simple. And George Miller's just like, I'm going to give you a very simple concept of this one woman is trying to protect these other women. She meets this one guy that's willing to help, and just the conflict that arises from that. I think the action is super well directed. I think it has such a cool look. The music is excellent. So going to this movie, I had fairly high expectations. George Miller actually directed a movie between these movies, 3,000 Years of Longing, with Idris Elba and Tilda Swinton. Super underrated movie. More people should check that one out. But yeah, I went to this movie with, I was trying to keep my expectations fairly tepid, but I'd be lying if I said I wasn't pretty excited. And yeah, this movie pretty much met them. I really, really loved this movie. And I think this Furiosa really establishes that no director in Hollywood, it doesn't matter how old, how young, no one knows how to shoot action and make it look cooler than George Miller at 79 years old. The fact that he is still doing this when he's pushing 80, I think is just insane and just such an incredible feat. And the fact that we still have George Miller working today, I think we as movie fans should cherish that, because no one can make action that looks this real and this visceral. Like, and the fact that he still is so committed to being like, I want to use CGI as little as possible. I want to use practical effects as much as I can. The fact that he's still using, putting a lot of work into stunt work and putting a lot of work into practical effects. and when like an explosion happens, it feels like you're really there. I think we should be really blessed that we have George Miller, and I think his direction is once again why this movie works and why all the Mad Max movies work. And I think that is something like really, really fascinating today. Anya Taylor-Joy had a lot to had big shoes to fill with how well Charlize Theron played Furiosa in Mad Max Fury Road. That character is legendary now for a reason, and a huge part of that is because of how great Charlize Theron was, how like iconic that look is with the shaved head, with the darkened eye, with like the eye makeup. And I think Anya Taylor-Joy did a phenomenal job as the character of young Furiosa. When we're first introduced to her, she's not like this ultimate badass warrior, but I think most people weren't expecting that. With this being a prequel, we see that she came from kind of smaller beginnings. Like we heard mentions of the green place in Mad Max Fury Road. That was her. That was where Furiosa grew up in. And yeah, seeing in the dystopia there was just like this one oasis, and seeing how the character of Furiosa sort of came from like, she wasn't meant to be a warrior. She was just supposed to have this simple life. And then seeing that snatched from her when Dr. Dementis kidnaps her at the beginning, I think is really, really fascinating. Also, shout out to Oliwa Brown, who plays the child Furiosa. I don't know how George Miller did it, but it's almost uncanny how much she looks like Anya Taylor-Joy. And when we do eventually jump forward in the future, because I will say this movie spends quite a large amount of the runtime with like child Furiosa before we meet teenage Furiosa. And throughout the whole time, I was like, did they just like find some way to like ultra de-age Anya Taylor-Joy? Like, I knew it wasn't her, but it's kind of crazy how well George Miller honestly has a great eye for picking out his actors. Like, he doesn't pick out like the most well-known or like biggest names, but he always picks out the people that are right for the part. And yeah, Oliwa Brown does a phenomenal job as young Furiosa, as does Anya Taylor-Joy, because towards the end, when she does realize that like Furiosa has nowhere else to go, you see like the life leave from Anya Taylor-Joy's eyes, and just saying, I need to kill Dementis and I need to side with Immortan Joe, and this sucks. Because if you saw Fury Road, you know Immortan Joe is a monster and is a villain, but you got to make choices. And I think Anya Taylor-Joy's performance really brings Furiosa to life. Chris Hemsworth having the time of his life as the villain. Chris Hemsworth is always someone I've enjoyed, whether it's the MCU movies, whether it's Bad Day at the El Royale, whether it's Cabin in the Woods. But this is hands down my favorite performance of his, mainly because I have never seen Hemsworth have this much fun in a movie. Like, he's using his native Australian accent. When we first meet him, he's not like super loud or super soft spoken. Like, he's trying to trick young Furiosa into like believing him that like, oh, he really is a good guy. If you just show me where your family is, everything's going to be okay. But after that scene, we completely see how much of a monster he is. He's chewing up every single piece of scenery he's in. And just in this world, in the Mad Max world, I think Hemsworth really shows how much as an actor he can shine, because just that voice he creates for Dementis. The second the character Dementis is excellent. Like, the second he learns of the Citadel and the fact that there are other people that have different like settlements in this world, I think is really, really fascinating. And just how he grows to be like this ultimate villain and eventually becomes like super threatening. Like, you understand how a character like this would grow to power in this world. The other major character that I want to talk about is Praetorian Jack, who we meet around halfway through the film when Furiosa is a teenager. He played by Tom Burke. Tom Burke is a really, really great actor. If you've seen Peaky Blinders, he was in that show. I think he does a really good job as playing like this like sort of soft-spoken character, kind of like what Max was in Fury Road to Furiosa. Maybe not as like manic as Max was, as this guy hasn't like completely lost his sanity. But I do think Tom Burke does a really, really great job of playing that character. With this movie being a prequel to Mad Max Fury Road, one of my favorite things was how well it builds off the world and the story that film played off. Like, not only do we see characters that we eventually know, that we eventually see in Fury Road, whether it's Immortan Joe, whether it's his two kids, or whether it's the People Eater, who's like that really like short guy in Fury Road that just that eventually grows to take control of Gastown, which is one of the worlds in Mad Max, or one of the settlements in Mad Max. but just like seeing these settlements that we only heard about in Fury Road, whether it's Gastown or seeing the Bullet Farm is excellent. Like seeing how each settlement serves a role in this world. And also like one of the most effective things this movie does is the first shot is just Australia from in space, and then it just zooms down into the desert. So we really see kind of like how small in a way this world is, because like you can't really go, and like you have these certain characters saying like this is all there's nowhere left to go. We can't go anywhere. And as an audience member, you're like, really? Like you can go anywhere, but then you're like, oh, that's right, because they're just on Australia, and it really is kind of just like a large island in a way. So I think that was really, really well done with how George Miller took the elements of Fury Road and built them off for this movie. Compared to Fury Road, this movie does have a lot less action. It's quite a bit longer than Fury Road, around 30 minutes longer. And while Mad Max Fury Road takes place around, I want to say like 24 to 48 hours, this movie takes place is a decade spanning like epic of this one girl like trying to seek revenge. She's constantly being toyed with, like she's being traded from Dementis to Immortan Joe. She eventually escapes Immortan Joe and becomes one of his soldiers. And just like, by the way, seeing the War Boys again, it's great. And like the first introduction of them is just one of the best scenes of the year. But yeah, I think it was really, really cool seeing George Miller tackle such a huge story in the Mad Max saga, because all of his stories tend to be like smaller stories, whether it's focusing on Max, kind of like in the day in the life of the survivor. This one is very much like, no, I want to tackle these big ideas, this big giant story. And by the end, you really feel like you have gone on this huge journey with Furiosa. The movie kind of has a bit of a poignant message about like, look, there is no one left for Furiosa to side with who is a decent person. Like everyone in power is a monster, whether it is Dementis or Immortan Joe. But seeing Furiosa decide like, look, if I'm going to take down this one guy who I think is the root of all evil, I decide with the lesser of two evils. And I think I doubt George Miller was getting at like a huge political statement there, but I think it was really, really effective just what he was saying with that lesson of what Furiosa decides to do. One of the lesser things I do think about this movie is I don't think the score is quite as good. I loved the score of Mad Max Fury Road, whether it's the drums or the electric guitar, like it constantly feels like it's at a kinetic high energy. And I think just one of the things this movie has working against it is that you just don't hear the score quite as often. It's not going to be as loud. It's not going to be as epic, mainly because this movie isn't on the Fury Road pacing level of just like we are at 80 miles per hour every single moment, just go. This movie has peaks and valleys, and it does that pretty well. But I think one of the unfortunate casualties of that is the score just isn't quite as good. I want to say one other weak element. When we first meet Immortan Joe in this movie, we learn that he kind of has like complete control over civilization. And I think seeing how easily Dementis is able to just take one of his settlements, I was kind of just like, that's it. Like knowing how like powerful and how like menacing Immortan Joe was in Fury Road, and seeing how just easily he was just taken down and outsmarted, I as an audience member was kind of like, that it seems like they need to convince us a little bit more that could have happened, because it seems like Dementis has a bit too easy of a time getting into power. But that's just me. Maybe that's a nitpick, but I'd be lying if I said that didn't quite bother me. Yeah, but that does about, I think, hit everything I want to talk about with this movie. We rate movies here on a scale of 0 to 10 videotapes, 0 being absolutely atrocious, 10 being absolutely exceptional. This is tough. If I were to rate Mad Max Furiosa on a scale of 0 to 10, I'm going to go high. I'm going to go 9.5 videotapes out of 10. This is a movie that walking out, I was trying really hard. I think it's important audience members don't take this movie for granted, because do I think it's quite as good as Mad Max Fury Road? No. Is it better than like 95% of action movies that have ever been released? Yes. And I think just George Miller just once again proves he's not just one of the great action directors. I think he's one of the greatest directors of all time. He's so phenomenal at creating worlds. He's so phenomenal at creating action scenes. Like, even though there's not quite as much action, like there is one huge action scene in the middle of this movie, and it is just as high kinetic and high energy as the one from Fury Road. And I think he just shows that he still has it. If you have the chance, please go see it in the biggest theater you can. I think movies like this need to be celebrated in screens because there are few people doing it like George Miller today, and really happy we still have him. But yeah, I say we move right into our second review for the night, that being the Garfield story, complete swap of tones. The Garfield move, or the Garfield move. Oh wow, that does say story. I'm gonna edit that. I apologize, everyone. Just give me one quick second. That is unprofessional. I am sorry. Save. The Garfield movie. That was gonna bother me the entire time if I did not change it. But yeah, this is the third theatrical Garfield movie of many people might know in the 2000s. Bill Murray did a few where he voiced the titular role. This time the titular character of Garfield is voiced by Chris Pratt. Typical things you know about the Garfield story character. He's living with his human companion, that being John. John has a dog named Odie. But in this movie, Garfield's dad Garfield ends up reuniting with his dad, voiced by Samuel Jackson, and who voices the character of Vic. That is Garfield's dad. And we learn that his dad is kind of in hot water and needs Garfield to help him steal some milk. So Garfield's a little trepidatious. Doesn't quite like his dad because he always felt that his dad abandoned him back in the day, which was how Garfield met John. And typical kids movie shenanigans starts to formulate. Watching this movie, I kind of had an observation where I just don't think the character of Garfield is really suited for feature-length films. Like when you're reading a comic strip or when you're watching like a 20-minute cartoon, I think that's where the character can be really, really effective, because the whole joke with Garfield is he's lazy, he's bossy, he's just kind of like an unlikable jackass, and I think that's kind of why we love him. But in a movie, I think that just gets a little too old at a point, and I think watching this film, I was like, why is this an hour 45 minutes? And I know the answer to that, because that's how long you need to fill for a feature length film. But I think just watching this movie, I was like, I just don't think the character of Garfield is really well suited for a movie length story. And this one definitely does feel padded out. The voice cast does a fine job. Nothing really remarkable there. Chris Pratt voices the title character. I know a lot of people tend to give Chris Pratt some crap. I don't really have a problem with him. But yeah, I do understand where people are saying, like, well, he's voicing Mario and now he's voicing Garfield. It seems like he's voicing everything now. He's doing his typical Chris Pratt thing, which, like, to me gets the job done, but isn't anything to like write home about. Samuel Jackson, he's okay. The villainous cat in this film, her name is Jinx. She's the one that has a score to settle with Vic, Garfield's dad, voiced by Hannah Waddingham, who played I feel bad I cannot remember her name, but she plays the owner of the team in Ted Lasso. She's actually pretty funny. It's fun that I've seen her now in two movies like this where she sort of plays like the person behind the scenes, that being the Garfield movie and The Fall Guys. Seriously, if you not check out The Fall Guy, I reviewed it earlier this month. The Fall Guy is great. You should all go check that out. But yeah, it's fun seeing her in this movie. The one character that I think gives that is kind of like the one shining spot in this movie is when Garfield and Vic and Odie go to rob the farm they need to. They meet a bull who was voiced by Ving Rhames, named Otto, and we learned that Otto was like was the mascot of this farm. Ving Rhames is excellent in this movie. Like, he's the sole reason why I can say I don't hate this movie. I didn't really like it, but his character is so funny. He has this speech pattern where he has like intentional, like dramatic pauses. It's Ving Rhames, so he has this really epic voice. And I think him deciding like he needs to be the one to train Garfield and Vic, he's the one that's going to bring these two characters together. His character is excellent. You learn that the cow that he was in love with still at the farm delivering milk, so he has an invested interest of breaking into the farm to eventually save her. If the movie was about him, like watching this movie, I was kind of like, could we have just gotten like an original animated movie about this bull named Otto? Like, this guy is hilarious, and I had a lot of fun with him. Halfway through the movie, Garfield and Vic have to do a heist with Otto. This is probably the most fun segment of the film, even though the heist doesn't really make sense. I think it's just fun watching characters like break into this location and having one character over here, one character over here. Again, doesn't really make sense when you really think about it, but it is pretty fun. I think one of the lesser parts of this movie is I just didn't think it was like funny at all, which like I know just seems like sort of like a shallow criticism, but like when you have an animated kids movie like this that is going for comedy, I was just shocked by like it's not like it's like criminally unfunny where like it's painful how little I'm laughing, but just watching the movie I was just like, I'm just not entertained and I'm just not having fun. I'm sure maybe if you're like if you have really young kids, they might find humor in this, but this movie really has like nothing for adults, and I think that is kind of an issue with animated movies, and I think we should expect better from movies that are intended for kids, that they can appeal to all ages. And then yeah, just at the end of the day, I think this movie just follows a very generic plot structure. Like I remember when the characters complete this heist, I remember like checking my watch and being like, we still have 30 minutes left. Like, where are we going to go with this? And I think it's just that when you really just look at the plot of this, of like, you have a character that was abandoned by his dad at the beginning of the film, taken in by another person. He's sort of like grown ownership there. He meets his dad again. They have some commotion, and just how that sort of resolves it. It doesn't really feel like it's maybe the worst complaint I can say about a movie, where I felt like I had wasted my time after watching this movie, which yeah, I'm a 26-year-old adult watching an animated Garfield movie, but I think if you're making a Garfield movie, try to make the best movie you can, and this movie just didn't hit that for me. If I were to rate this movie on a scale of 0 to 10 videotapes, I think I'm going to give it a 4 out of 10. I think it was a bad movie, nothing horrible, nothing like insulting. Again, if it had more Ving Rhames and every time his character was on screen, I think it was actually pretty fun. Auto is going to be like the best part of the worst movie of the summer for me this year, probably. But yeah, other than that, I think it's just nothing to write home about. You don't really need to see this in theaters unless you have really young kids and you really need to take them to something. This one can probably be avoided. But thank you all for watching this week. Remember to like this video and subscribe to the video store. It helps us grow our channel a lot. Next week, I'm going to be reviewing the new horror film In a Violent Nature, as well as one other movie. I'm going to have to check the schedule. But thank you all for watching this week. And remember, watch more movies.
And the award for most vapid film review of the century goes to...
Okay, movie review. Okay, I thought it was beauty.
And he's now in cinema hell, where one day we'll all be reunited.
This is me at the Regal Cinema crying as I did through much of the film.